And we are live.
Awesome. Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to another rad community conversations on race here with Community Action Partnership of Sonoma County. We've got an awesome panel today to tackle a really tough topic this week: white privilege and overcoming white fragility. So we've loosely based our conversation tonight around the topics presented in the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo and How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi, which we recommend but are not necessary to follow along or participate in today's conversation. So let's dig right in and start getting to know our panel today. I'll get us started off. My name is Johnny Nolen. I'm the sitting president of the Board of Directors at Community Action Partnership of Sonoma County, where I have volunteered since 2017. And I've been working in the cannabis industry since 2003, both as an activist and as a professional. I live in Santa Rosa with my amazing husband, Roberto, who is a Brazilian immigrant, which gives me a dual perspective on how my experience in the world differs from here. And to take it away, Serene.
Good evening. I really want to thank you, Kat, for hosting these important conversations in our community. I'm here as a neighbor and ally in this work, and I'm really honored to share my experience. That said, while I might be hypersensitive or raw around certain topics, I'm really trying to keep the focus on the topics at hand and hold myself accountable. I moved to Santa Rosa about 15 years ago when I went back to school at SSU at the age of 32, and I was the first person in my family to go to college. I came from a poor working class family, and for most of my life, I really had to figure out things on my own and be scrappy. Although most days, I think I show up as a successful and educated woman. I identify with and have been marked by poverty. This has inspired and moved me really to volunteer and work at nonprofits with the goal of being in service to and advocating for women, children, and people of color.
Awesome. Thank you, Serene. And let's hear from Jamie.
Hello, my name is Jamie Padilla, and I am a board member for the Board of Community Action Partnership. And I've been on that board for almost 10 years now, and I'm proud to say that. I'm also a trustee for the Bellevue Union School District Board as well, and am serving my second term as doing that. So I am a wife and a mother to two beautiful children. I have an 18-year-old daughter, Allison, and a 14-year-old son, Sebastian. My passion in life is just to change people's life by doing good. So tonight I hope to be able to learn a little bit more about how to do that through this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Right on, Jamie. And let's hear from Stephen.
Thank you, Johnny. And I want to echo what Serene said. Thanks for hosting these conversations. Thanks to Kat for doing this. And briefly, I think I'm older than all of the panelists here, so I'm going to shrink my bio a little bit. I grew up in Fresno with a sort of a, not really a sort of a racist, definitely a racist father, not quite so overtly racist mother. And then I got, for some reason, I went into the theater. And I spent most of my adult life in professional theater. So I worked as an actor and director and artistic director at California Shakespeare Festival, Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Alabama Shakespeare Festival, and even some theaters without Shakespeare Festival in their title. I worked at the Edinburgh International Theater Festival and moved into this area, into Sonoma County 20 years ago. And I got involved with some local theater at the Sonoma County Repertory Company, Cloverdale Performing Arts Theater, and since 2014, I've been the artistic director of the Raven Players, which is the resident theater company of the Raven Performing Arts Theater in Healdsburg. I am married to a wonderful woman, and we are a blended family. And between the two of us, we have 4 children, 4 kids, 4 adults, kids, and a couple of rats, cats, some fish, and a couple of puppies on the way. Not from my wife, but from a dog.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, Leslie, let us know who you are.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you so much for hosting this, and for Kat for doing such amazing work with this community conversations on race series. I'm very honored to be here. And I am actually originally from San Diego. I moved up to Northern California to go to college and went to UC Santa Cruz, go Slugs. Banana Slugs, that is. I am a mom of, I also have a blended family. We have 3 children with my husband that we got married in 2017. So we're still somewhat newlyweds. And I am also right around that same time started to organize events in Sonoma County and specifically here in Santa Rosa. I came from an event marketing and community background, nonprofits as well as corporations. And some of the events that I've put on range from everything from car shows to Rosie the Riveter rallies, and probably most notably protest events and marches like the Women's March and some Stop the Abortion Ban rallies and other rallies. So I'm really, really excited to be here. And I'm also really interested in learning more from all of you. So I'm excited to be here with all of you.
Awesome. Thank you, Leslie. And thank you all for coming on and tackling this difficult topic with us. Before we get into the questions, I do want to acknowledge that this is a panel of all white people. This was a conscious decision that we made together as a group after careful consideration, because one of the many themes that we've heard through these conversations is that white people need to do the work. And that's the work of educating ourselves, of taking action to unwind the racist status quo. And the first steps to all of this is acknowledging and understanding privilege and identifying learned and expressed biases and how we process the feelings that come with white fragility. So we need to do this work on ourselves, and we don't need to drag anyone else into moderating or facilitating it for us. That being said, this conversation is hosted on the premise that we all acknowledge that white privilege does exist and that nothing discussed here is intended to justify, deny, or contest its existence. Definitely white privilege is a thing. Also, we are not a panel of experts on race by any means. We're not making any claims of perfection or righteousness as we make these discussions. We are simply 5 community members who are earnestly seeking to understand our role in this racially slanted societal structure and want to learn how we can change and grow for the better. So some of the things that we say tonight, you might not agree with or you might find problematic. We definitely all have room to evolve ourselves. And we're open to feedback, as this entire purpose here is to change and grow. But I do ask that everyone please be respectful of our panelists in the comments, in the communications, because by doing this in a public forum, we're opening ourselves up to a position of vulnerability. So please remember our earnest intentions here tonight. So moving on to the first question. One of the most difficult parts of white fragility is that we can easily become defensive or upset when we're caused to reflect upon our personal biases or tacit participation in the racist status quo. Here in Sonoma County, where many of us vehemently self-identify as progressive, it can be shocking to realize that we are not immune to the influences of being raised in a highly racist society. So I would like to hear from each of you. Can you tell us about an awakening moment that you can remember when you became very aware of your white privilege and or your white fragility? And Stephen, can you start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. I'll say also, I want to be perfectly honest with everybody that we had a pre-meeting on Friday, and then I had the weekend to stew and fret about all of this. And I actually wrote notes for myself, and see it right here, right there. And then, about a half an hour ago, I decided I'm an actor and a director. And when I'm directing actors, I say, look, you know who you are, you know what you're saying, you know what the words are, and just trust it. And stop thinking, get out of your head. And so I've decided to throw these notes away and just speak from my heart. And as Johnny said, so eloquently said, it may not be perfect, it may not even be coherent, but I'll prove it to you. I'm gonna take my glasses off so I can't even read my notes. So I was thinking about this over the weekend because we sort of knew what the questions were going to be. And I was racking my brain. I said, I feel like I've been aware of white privilege, even though I wasn't able to name it for almost my entire life. But a specific moment did come to my mind This morning when I woke up at 2:30 in the morning, I went, oh, that's it. I remember this. I'm sure we can all relate to this. I was about to direct a production of Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors in Jackson, Mississippi. And at that time, this was the 90s. And in the theater world, there was this movement called colorblind casting, which all it meant was, which should seem like common sense, that you would cast the best actor for the role, no matter what their color was. But this was, a revolutionary thought that, you didn't have to always cast a white actor as a traditionally white role. So I was casting a Comedy of Errors, and the artistic director of the theater let it be known that, hey, we're colorblind casting. And I talked to an actor, a Black actor friend of mine, and he said, he was from New York, and he said, I got to tell you, I've heard this phrase before, and I hate it. And I said, why? And he said, well, if you're colorblind, then that means you don't see the color, which means you're not seeing me. And at that moment, it was like, oh my God, what was supposedly this, construct set up to equalize a casting pool did exactly the opposite. And I wasn't able to articulate or even like process it in my brain at the time, but I realize now that in hindsight that it was a white privilege. It was almost a white savior sort of thing, that I was the white male director who got to decide which colors I was going to be blind to. And I think it took me years to really actually viscerally understand where he was coming from. But I think, to answer the question, that was a moment I can look back on now, not that I realized it at the time, but I look back on it now as a really eye-opening moment for me in my career and in my personal life.
Yeah, the colorblind concept can be so interesting because there's a sort of like assumption of the white standard where my race doesn't matter, so then we can accept that nobody's race matters. Which is
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Leslie, tell us about your Satori moment.
Yeah, I think that concept of white privilege, for me as a child, I grew up in South San Diego, which is actually at the time that I was a child was predominantly Hispanic, with most of the schools that I went to. And I had situations both at home and at schools where being singled out as the person that got to go and do things. And you start to realize that you're different than the people who aren't getting to go and do things. So the things that I'm talking about are little things that really add up. Like in the neighborhood, I could go to anybody's house, but my friends couldn't necessarily come to my house or a certain house down the street. And those friends just happened to be, from Mexico or first generation. And, or in school, I got certain privileges, like being able to go to another classroom and mentor others, or, help to be a teacher's assistant, and my friends didn't get to go and do that. All the way up. And that's like, I'm just talking about this like in elementary school. So really, really young, but you start to notice those differences. And I was even noticing the differences when I was, listening to the local news station, and they would talk about how farm workers were getting rounded up and taken back over the border because they had come across the border, quote unquote, illegally. So, and those were my friends, actually. Those were people that their parents were getting rounded up in these buses by the current mayor of San Diego when I was a child. So I started to notice these kinds of things, and it stuck with me. And I think the first moment that I thought of it as a real privilege, something I didn't attend to when I was talking about kind of my bio, is that I'm a foster kid. And so as a foster child, when I was in when I was in my group home. I was placed in a group home for a while when I was in high school, and every other child in that group home was a child of color, and I was the only white child as a teenager, and I got placed in a foster home first. So it was a moment of privilege that you realize, wait a second, because they had all been there for months, if not a year or more. So it became very apparent, and it's something that I think about, that, you know, how I've been able to travel through my life situations, you know, because I've had that privilege.
Right on. Thank you. Let's hear from Serene.
You know, Leslie, you reminded me of something also that I didn't share that I think it contributed a lot to my experience. So my father is in the military, which meant we moved a lot. And I did a count. I think I attended maybe 10 or 11 schools from K to 12. And so I was constantly moving, constantly changing, constantly being the new kid, trying to fit in. So I don't remember like a stability of time of doing a lot of noticing about things until maybe high school and as a young adult, where I stayed in one place longer to pay attention to my surroundings. And at that point, I found myself much more in an urban environment. I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. My high school was very diverse. So I just didn't think about these things. I didn't sit around and contemplate how people were the same or different. I just thought we were all the same because of the poverty that we shared. And I remember when I first had that revelation about that white privilege has nothing to do with wealth, but everything to do with the way in which I can smoothly move through the world because of my race. That when I realized that I could walk into most situations seen as an equal, as belonging, always given the benefit of doubt. I wasn't being followed around the store. I wasn't being just judged just by what I looked like. That was a revelation to me. And also grappling with, you know, going through life, identifying as a woman, identifying as working class. I asked myself, how might that experience been different if I had been an immigrant or a woman of color? It would have been very different, because there were policies, laws, and social norms that allowed me access that I couldn't have had. It's completely opposite about how systemic racism has inflicted and kept brown, black, and indigenous people from that same access. So that was really just, it was mind blowing for me. I came to that.
Right on. And Serene, it sounds a little bit like your microphone's starting to go in and out.
Okay.
So if you
Talk
could
louder.
Yeah, there you go. That sounds
All
perfect.
right.
Cool. Thank you. And let's hear from you, Jamie.
Okay, so I kind of think I went blindly through most of my life until about probably 6 or 7 years ago. And being part of the CAP board, I was offered to attend a diversity training. And that was something that was completely new to me. I didn't even know really what it was when I signed up for it. But through that, it gave me the opportunity to kind of take a look at things differently. It was the first time I had heard white privilege. I didn't know what that was. And it really made me start looking at things through a different lens, because then I noticed instances in my life where it was happening that before I wouldn't see that. You know, so I realized in that moment that I needed to do something different. I'm recognizing it now, but what happens next? So what do I do with that? And I feel like this is kind of where I'm at today. I've realized it, I've recognized it, and I even say that I'm part of the problem, which is really hard to admit as I think back on instances in my life. But now it's like I'm aware and I want to make a change. So education is the way to do that, right?
Awesome. Thank you. And there is sort of that Pandora's box of once you see it, you can never unsee it, and you start to see it everywhere you look more and more. And thank you also for acknowledging that you recognize it and you also reflect on how you've been part of the problem. That can be a really difficult process, and it can bring up a lot of really challenging emotions. One of the things that I learned while researching this is that psychologists have identified that while anger, fear, guilt, and sadness and other negative emotions can actually trigger learning behavior where the brain rewrites its formatting to learn from the experience. The emotion shame is actually counterproductive as it prompts the brain to generate justifications or solidify false beliefs that protect the ego in times of moral crisis. And the thought behind that is that other emotions are usually directed at a specific event. I'm sad about this, I'm angry about this, I'm guilty about this. But shame is an emotion that's directed at the identity of a person. So I'm ashamed of myself, which is a really difficult and damaging statement to be making to yourself. So I would like to ask everybody to describe how each of you process these complex emotions that come up surrounding your white fragility or acknowledging your white privilege, and in a healthy way. And how do you find it challenging and how do you overcome it? And let's start with Serene.
Very excited about this question.
Easy.
That's a small joke. I think that I'm right in the middle of it. I mean, that's part of my process, right? Really, I don't have any great tips for you all. I'm hoping you all can help me. I'm here to learn. I think you're right about the shame factor, right? Sometimes the fear and frustration can move us forward and move us into action, but really paying attention to when I'm feeling that shame. And then wondering, well, what do I do about it now? And I think that the biggest thing for me is to push through that and to make sure it doesn't move me into inaction, into being paralyzed, or into feeling that nothing I do is right. So, feeling like I have to be so cautious about everything I do and say because it's not going to be right, it's not going to be good enough, I'm going to be judged. I'm right in the middle of it. So I don't have any great advice. I am working on it. I'm reading, I'm researching, I'm talking with people who know me well and getting coaching, and that's where I'm at. I'm right smack dab in the middle of
Right on. Well, you're doing the work. And something that I often tell myself in my process with this is it's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to acknowledge that you made a mistake. It's okay to feel bad about it as long as you take the process to the side of the cycle that is to change and grow and learn from it. So keep making those mistakes and learning and changing and growing. Let's hear from Jamie. Tell us about how you process these difficult emotions.
So I really think in the past that I personally dealt with it by feeling guilt and shame. I know now that I'm awake and I don't need to feel that. What I need to do is just focus on creating a better understanding of my part that I play around white fragility and racism. And I find it challenging to always know if my thoughts are in line or on the right track, or if my comments are going to offend someone or not be appropriate. And I had to really let my good intentions go, because I don't think it's about good or bad. I think we need to make positive changes. And to do that, we have to have a better understanding of our own role as well as others.
That's a great approach. Do you find that as you start to let go of that fear that you do offend people when you speak, or do you find that it was more of an unfounded fear?
I think it was more of an unfounded fear, and I'm still a work in progress. So I'm sure as I go along in this process, I will experience that. But for right now, I just think I'm really in the learning process. So I'm ready to take commentary. I'm ready to take feedback. And you know what? It's not always going to be oh, you've said the perfect thing and it's great. That's fine. I don't need to always say the perfect thing. I just want to make sure that I'm not being part of the problem, and I'm not keeping racism happening.
Right on. All right, Stephen, let's hear from you.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It's a really challenging question and a complex question. And I promise this is the last time I'll talk about Jackson, Mississippi tonight, but in the same year I was there, the longest year of my life, it was 1995, and Mississippi had been the only state never to not ratify the 13th Amendment, but they did in 1995, 130 years later. And there was a big deal about it. And my immediate reaction was, it was what you were talking about, Johnny, is that I felt guilt. I wanted to go out and apologize. I felt so guilty. But as everybody's been saying so far, I don't have the answers, and I still struggle. But I do know that, you know, when you say we're going to attack and dismantle systemic racism, that's fantastic, but what does that mean? So you know, I'm one person, and all I can do, and what I've been trying to do, is stay true to myself and true to my beliefs. And, you know, everybody wants to be heard. And I try to value that every day, and especially with this sort of topic. And I feel like if I commit to making progress every day with every person I encounter, that, you know, as Dr. Kendi said, it's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist, and to speak up and stand up, and let people know when in maybe innocuous things that I would have let slide by in years past, to stop and say, this isn't good, and I need to deal with this right now. And I think that's how I can handle it. You know, I've got to break it down into baby steps that I can manage and take every day. I fortunately get the advantage to model the behavior in front of my family, and that's good feedback. That's immediate feedback right away to see how, you know, our kids are handling it and how they're reacting to what's going on in the world.
Right on. Family activism. Luke.
Yeah, family activism.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And Leslie, let's hear from you.
Yeah, thanks.
Emotions.
Really, I feel need to echo just about everything that everybody has said, just bits and pieces of everybody's processing through that. And it is really challenging. It's one of the questions, like Stephen had said, that we had gotten beforehand. And I thought, oh no, you know, do I have a healthy way? That word healthy really, really stood out. And I don't know that is necessarily healthy for me, because I do really connect with that word shame. And when I kind of researched it a little bit, just to even try to figure out my feelings around it and what I do, I realized that I do withdraw, and that I will take myself out of situations in order to have time to think and to process, and then to come back to it. And sometimes that's a really long time. Sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's a little, just a short period of time. And sometimes it's a really long period of time, depending on the situation. So it's definitely a work in progress. And I really thought back also to the book, and that word stamina. And I thought about how COVID has decreased my stamina completely. My stamina for just general socialization, my stamina around, the socialization of racism and how to combat it, because I'm just not around people as much. And I don't get to have really robust conversations and interactions with people as much. So coming out of COVID, I think that there's even more work to do for us all to interact, and for me to interact with people, and have patience and have humility. So if those answers come to Serene, I'm going to snatch a few of them from the people that are watching as well. So
if you guys have answers in the audience, please put them in the comments. We need. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. It's interesting talking about the stamina effect of the pandemic. Also, I've noticed with myself, like a drop in tolerance for racist BS too, and because we're so in our own little bubble and like in our echo chambers of our family and friends, that now when I am put in a position with people I'm less familiar with, and some of this racist behavior rears its head, I just go straight 0 to 60. Like, no, we're not doing that here. I'm not having that conversation with you right now. Mm-hmm. I guess some of the patience and humility, I'm going to have to figure out how to get that back after the pandemic. So for the next question, is going to address how part of the infrastructure of systemic racism is the establishment that whiteness is the standard. And this is most commonly created and upheld and reinforced by the pervasive whiteness of media. And that's both in news media, entertainment media, anything that we're consuming intellectually throughout our daily lives. And when I learned about this concept, I realized that I myself consume largely white media, and then I was surprised how much of a difference it made in the breadth of my understanding of the world and of different perspectives, and how much easier it made for me to grapple with and comprehend different perspectives from people of color when I deleted my subscription to listening every week the 4 white dudes on Pod Save America and replaced it with a really insightful podcast called Our Body Politic, hosted by Farai Chidea, a woman of color. And that really changed my experience of examining these issues in my life and in general. So I'd like to hear from each of you. How have you learned to identify racial imbalances in the media and entertainment that you consume, and how can you strive to offset them? And for this one, let's start with Leslie.
Yeah, and when I looked at this, I thought, well, it is so imbalanced that, the real question for me was just to acknowledge that it's there in all media. And the reason why it's there is because media is set up in this capitalistic society where it is selling you a product. So, and the people that hold the goods are predominantly white males in that system. So, and they're the ones that are prospering over this. So looking for those outside sources, I'm going to have to write down the one that you mentioned, but I was turned on recently to this Black Information Network. And so I go there, and it is a slightly different view, right? It's not that the world turns over 180 degrees, it's that you're putting Black and brown voices first. And you're hearing that aspect of it first. And that was a most recent find by a gentleman told me about that, but also just thinking about the different people that you listen to. So if somebody doesn't have anything to sell you, if they're not selling you consumer goods and they're giving you the news or giving you information, it's usually a little bit more pure of heart. So I try to look for those voices, instead of a media outlet. Although I have to admit that I do attend to media outlets because I'm in the world of doing things on social media. So it's right there. And then I was having a conversation with my husband, I'll say this really quickly, is that social media in and of itself, we turn it on, and most of us do this a little bit to a lot throughout the day. I post for other organizations and for companies and whatnot as a social marketing person. So I see people and they just turn it on and they see just a little bit of a feed. And it's usually only encapsulates the things that they've liked. So I think our narrow view is not just, the bigger media outlets, but that social media aspect, our view is so limited. So look outside of that, start liking things and start following things that aren't necessarily in your preview, and look to others and ask them, what do they like? Look to people who have different voices than yours and see who they follow and follow them too. And you'll find another point of view maybe.
Awesome. That's a great point. And it's one of the awesome things I think about social media and internet user generated content is that where there's an incredible economic and social power structure that drives the whiteness of corporate traditional media, the internet gives sort of an equalized playing ground that anyone can produce content. So nobody has any excuse for not exposing themselves to different perspectives and different cultures. It's all on the internet. And there's a lot of amazing stuff coming out from there right now. Leslie, can you tell us what is the Black and Brown Network that you were talking about? Someone in the comments.
Yeah, it's BIN, it's Black Information Network.
BIN?
So BIN, and it's it just started in 2020, and it's nationwide. They do have a radio broadcast, but I haven't listened to it on the radio. I've just been going on online and catching the articles. So like today, I saw that, and I didn't see this in any of the major news outlets, that Stacey Abrams was supporting the unionization at Amazon in Alabama. So, something I would have missed if I wouldn't have gone there. So it's a good one. I'm sure there's lots of others.
Very awesome. Thank you for sharing. All right, Serene, tell us about your media experience.
Well, I have to say that I get stuck in my habits. So when I don't listen to newer music, and I noticed that about myself, that I listen to CDs, that ages me. And I tend to listen to the same thing over and over again. So, I've noticed that I need to pay attention to what's going on. One of the ways I found more easier than adjusting to my musical taste was really with everything streaming. I mean, I'm new to social media and like Instagram. And so putting my toe into that was cultivating content for our youth Instagram at the organization I work for. That has had me seeking out all kinds of different programs and points of views and news and information that I have learned so much from. And the feed is it's just incredible, to where I'm getting counterculture, I'm getting information, I'm getting news, I'm getting education. And it's really opened my eyes to how different and how narrow it was. I mean, I noticed how narrow things were politically, which is why I try not to read my political news on Facebook. So I know how things get constricted, which is what inspired me to seek out specific channels on Instagram. See, I've got the wrong name even for it. But it's really been great. I've enjoyed it, and I've crossed over to my personal one as well. The other thing I appreciate about our streaming television opportunities is that I'm not just watching what's coming on. I'm seeking out specific things. I'm seeking out specific program directors, actors that have people of color in them, and it's really been enjoyable. The other thing I will say is that I was telling my partner about it, that when you watch something that even is one race, and then there's another scene where there's a mixture, then it changes your perspective. We're used to seeing, as white folks, we're represented everywhere, magazines, television, and watching programming that is predominantly another race. It's a different experience. I mean, I remember a community meeting that I went with an organizer where the entire meeting was in Spanish. And it just really allows you to see that, this is how people are experiencing it. We may not experience it that way, but that's the experience of other folks. Just, it's been super helpful and instructive.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, Jamie, what kind of media are you consuming these days?
So I do a lot of streaming because I like to learn a lot about a lot of different things. So I like to try to keep a very open mind and try to learn about as many things as possible. I think that a lot of news or media can be very biased. And so I really try to stick away from that. I try to go to several outlets that I trust to get my news, because I notice that in mainstream, you'll only see one side. And there's all of these other things that are going on that never make it to the mainstream media. And it's almost as if we have to take that extra step to seek those kinds of informations out. So really kind of like doing the legwork, looking into it, staying away from stuff that is biased or not representing everyone. And it's something I have to work on every day. You have to be consciously aware, of what you're consuming, so that you can make better choices.
Awesome. And what about you, Stephen?
Yeah, that's I find this really, really challenging, because as Leslie was talking about this, and Jamie too, is that this is stuff you have to seek out, right? You have to make the effort. And sometimes I think, well, I don't know where to go to make that effort. But what I've done in the last year or so is, I'm a newspaper guy. I read the newspaper, and I try to make sure that I read all the columns if it's David Brooks, if it's George Will, if it's Eugene Robinson, if it's Leonard Pitts, I'm trying to, get a lot of different points of view. And I found that I used to listen to a Paula Poundstone podcast, and kind of like you, Johnny, I thought, oh, I'm going to try something else. So I started listening to, it's not really a podcast, but it's the Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man, right? And it's Emmanuel Acho, right? And I started watching those, and it was fabulous. I got sucked into it because to me, I don't know if everybody's out there have seen them, but when I started watching it, I thought this is fantastic because here is this is a point of view I don't know, and it's presented in such a non-intellectual, non-academic way that I didn't have because I realized that I was worried about am I saying the right buzzwords? Am I using the right verbiage here? And then I felt like this was a really refreshing guy just sitting around and talking with people, having these uncomfortable conversations with a Black man. And I thought, I love that. And I felt like I'm getting some, a really different perspective, something, things that wouldn't cross my mind. And actually in popular entertainment, I found that Atlanta, the Donald Glover show, is, talk about a different perspective on a different point of view on American life. I have found that show extremely not entertaining and compelling. But like you said, I think that the biggest, and I don't think I'm doing as good of a job as I'd like to, is seeking out those alternative viewpoints.
Well, it's an infinite process, I think, always discovering. Thank you for bringing up non-news entertainment. I think, a lot of times when we talk about media, we think about news and, intentional media, but normalization of every race in our culture coming together and being spotlit individually and together also comes a lot of times from the things just bring us joy, TV shows, movies, music, and stuff like that. I recently watched the HBO show The Watchmen. Did anyone see that? Yeah, it should be required viewing for a white person in America. It starts with the Tulsa Massacre.
Yeah.
And it's a story through like a fantasy timeline that is dealing with white supremacy and the fight for justice. Just incredible, and told mostly from the perspective of the Black characters, and really, like, even for a fantasy world, very insightful. Highly recommend that as well. Awesome. Well, thanks you guys. So for the next question, in the book White Fragility, the author Robin DiAngelo gives many examples of the toxic expressions of white fragility, and often separated by gender behaviors. These can include presenting misleading statistics to divert attention from the issue, or angrily claiming the power in a conversation by shouting "Blue Lives" or "All Lives Matter." We've all heard that before, of course. Playing reverse racism card, and or even, as they talk about, white women's tears, by crying to reclaim control by becoming a victim in the conversation, and then turning the person of color confronting racism into an aggressor, drawing on generations of portrayal of people of color being aggressors. And these are very destructive, toxic behaviors that set these conversations backwards. These tactics are generally to protect the white ego from facing a valid critique. So I ask you guys each tonight, how have you observed or experienced white fragility or racist behavior in your white community, and how do you address it when it pops its ugly head in real time? Let's start this one off with Jamie.
Sorry, my son had to pop in and give me a hug. He really needed one. I apologize.
Legit.
So I know that I've experienced white fragility and racist behavior in my daily life in my community several times and in several ways. When I see these things happening, it just evokes so many emotions in me that I'm almost unsure how to process what is happening in like real time so that I can do something about it. I think that I will gain skills as I continue to learn and grow on how to be better when I'm presented with these situations, because I think that being unsure keeps you from speaking up sometimes. And you kind of just shrink back in, and you're not really sure what role you play, or if you play any role at all. So I think that we just really, again, need to be open to comments and feedback. That helps us be more confident when we're out in our communities and we see these things happening, that we know how a wide variety feel when those things take place. So I just want to, gain a true understanding that we've been raised in a system of racism, and we have to truly understand it before we can create change. So I think that's what we're doing right now. We're creating an understanding, and then we need to have action. How do we do this? How do we propel forward?
Right on. What about you, Stephen? How do you tackle real-time racism?
If I'm, and forgive me if I'm going off on a tangent, but the question to me was, when you said it, it immediately, and it's funny because we had the questions ahead of time and I didn't think about it until this moment, but what was helpful to me in a funny, not funny way, was during the Black Lives Matter last summer, and I live in Healdsburg, and we had an art installation downtown that was put there by two young women who were fairly recent graduates of Healdsburg High School. So I went down, and this was the night that the mayor, the now former mayor of Healdsburg, was down there with some other council members, and she was confronted, by some people who wanted some answers. And they were talking about, there was one question about the Healdsburg police, right? And one of the council members actually said, almost literally said, well, this is Healdsburg. That doesn't happen here, and it was it was that sort of cliche, hey, no, this is somebody else. This is not our problem. And that was really eye-opening, that it was said, B, it was thought, and C, it was said in a public forum like this. And I thought to myself, perhaps not kindly, I thought, well, this is a good example of what not to do. And this is because you saw the defense mechanism. You could almost see the shield come up. And that was a good real-time lesson for me to say, wow, as Jamie alluded to, the first thing to do is say, okay, yeah, you're right. This is a problem. Now, what do we do about it? So I took that, I sort of stole that lesson from somebody else's life and applied it to me, is that, I had to learn to really, if I ask a question, I've got to be willing to listen to the answer, no matter how hard it may be.
Yeah, it can be really difficult too. And it can take a lot of courage. All right. What do you think, Leslie? How do you face these challenging situations?
Yeah, and facing them, and unfortunately, I have to admit and be really honest, is that I've created them. I've been in situations where I've created all the circumstances and the players and the conversation, and it's gone awry, and then not dealt with it well. So I feel for people in that situation, because I know that I have been there, and I know in not dealing with it well that it festers, and that it creates, obviously, all of our white socialization, all of our white privilege is in that moment. And that is what is being amplified, is our fragility instead of other people's voices. So I know that I've been an aspect and a part of that. And recently, I would say over the past 6 months, since the summer, 6 to 8 months, I guess, I have been really trying to listen more, and in listening more, putting myself in those spaces where Black and Brown voices have been very, very loud, very amplified, and can be very uncomfortable. And I'm not even in the room. These are usually Zoom calls because it's COVID. So one thing that has stood out to me, and I'm going to take this a little bit differently is that I've started to notice that our elected officials, not every single one of them by any means, but kind of this new wave of elected officials are dealing with these situations better and are addressing it head on and are talking openly about it and are expressing when something is not right. And I am learning from those situations. So I know of the situation in Healdsburg, and I know how awry that went. But the result of that situation in Healdsburg is now there's 3 new people on the city council, and they're all amazing. And there's many more new people throughout Sonoma County on different city councils, on different elected boards, and I've been listening, and I have to say that I think by hearing those situations, when there's lots of public comment that is racist, and having an elected official that's here locally, we see them at the grocery store and they speak to it and they speak out and say that it's wrong, or they bring people in and say, no, we got to address this differently. It has really instilled in me that this is how you do it. So I guess I'm not completely answering your question, but I am a little bit redirecting, that I feel like the tide is turning, and it's becoming like, yes, we can address this more. Even our local officials are doing that. So it makes me feel good that I can speak up.
You can, and it is really cool seeing the elected officials, and hopefully seeing that played out on the public stage empowers more of us and our community members to speak out more courageously in real time, because those conversations are conversations that people of color can't have. When it's all white people in a room, it's up to the white people to say, hey, stop for a minute. That's super racist. And it's going to be a different reaction from that coming from a white person than someone from a different color than the commenter who is exhibiting racist behavior. So let's hear from Serene. What have you experienced in addressing racism in real time?
I will say that I really struggle with this, pushing through, being socialized, first of all, to not always recognize it. I mean, I recognize outright racism and people disrespecting each other, but the stuff that happens more often, that is stuff that we may not see as much, that we really have to pay attention to. I mean, that's the thing I think that we need to stay vigilant and on top of. And I find that I experience it in myself when I feel a desire to keep the peace, to play nice, to explain away an uncomfortable situation, in a way that I've tried to deal with it, or to coach others to, talk to someone in a way they can understand. I realize that in some way doing that is reinforcing the status quo. It's not challenging the status quo. And it can be very frustrating for me. And one of the things I'm really working on is working through being uncomfortable, working through feeling awkward, right? Working through the desire to keep the peace instead of addressing what's going on when I'm feeling uncomfortable about it. And I have to say that I experienced it real time. And whether it was perfect or not, it was real time. And I thought, good on them. I agree about our public officials, Leslie. I think I was at a public safety committee meeting in Santa Rosa on Zoom. And one of our city council members threatened to mute a community member who was speaking. And she was a woman of color, because she disrespected another city council member who was white. And I was shocked, but I also was pleased that every single public comment speaker that came on after that first said, like, that's absolutely wrong. You should not be silencing people of color when they're trying to address their grievances with you. And then at a certain point, that council member said, you know what, I apologize. I'm sorry that I reacted in that way. That was inappropriate. And that was real time. And I thought, and it was very tense. And I thought, good on you for realizing real time that you screwed up like we do every day and addressing it. It takes practice. And so that's, for me, it's about practicing, pushing through the discomfort and practicing calling it out when I see it.
That's a change happening in real time in our world. One of the things that I kind of learned about this through some very awkward situations is there's this misconception from white people that we have to be very eloquent and prepared to retort against racist comments and behaviors in our community. We don't. There is a moral high ground there, and you could just say, hey, wait a minute, no, you need to explain yourself. We don't have to justify anti-racism. That is self-justifying behavior. And we can let go of that sort of societal expectation put upon us that we don't want to make racist people upset. Or I'm trying to learn, we don't want to make people exhibiting racist behaviors upset. I don't believe that it's a racist person who does a racist behavior. So moving on, the next question, and related as well. So another topic that's come up many times in these conversations is the difference between white allyship and white saviorism. White saviorism is white person lends aid to a non-white person or people in a way that spotlights them or advances their personal agenda. It can happen inadvertently by well-meaning progressive white people because we're so used to dominating the narrative. So I ask you guys tonight, how do you identify pathways to true allyship and guard against this tendency to take on the savior role? Another way to ask that too, in context, is how do you actively lift people of color up in your life? And how do you do that? How do you find that challenging? And we're going to start on that one start with Stephen again.
Oh, Johnny, jeez.
Hard questions for you.
Everybody else's answers. That may be, thanks for saving the toughest one for last. That may be the hardest challenge I experienced. And I think it might've been Leslie earlier that said it's even harder now because we are socially isolated. And I run a theater, and theater is nothing but socialization. And I feel like, half of my, most of my tools are gone right now, or they're atrophying because I haven't been able to use them. And I guess, I'll go back to something I said before, is that I can control what I can control. And I think that I've got to keep reminding myself that there's a difference between doing something for, doing something to, doing something at, and doing something with. And when this all came down last summer, when this upheaval happened, and we looked at this opportunity to make have strides forward, personally and professionally, I thought, we're a community theater and we're supposed to be serving the community, so we've got to make a statement about this. And we came out and said, we're your ally. We are a place of freedom, a place you can come, a place you can share your voice. And part of me is just, I'm so, I just can't wait till the time we can open up our doors again and make that promise come true, is to say, we are here to hear stories. There's a huge Latinx community that we live in that we have neglected. And I want those stories told. I want those stories shared. And it's a little selfish because there are stories that I want to hear. And it's also, the dual purposes. We serve our community, and it's the community. It's not done something at somebody, it's done something with. So that's a long-winded way of saying I struggle with this, daily and hourly. And all I come back to is that I can offer, me as an individual, to listen to somebody else, as we said over and over tonight, and really listen to somebody else and somebody else's point of view. And also as a theater director and an artistic director of a theater, to say, you have a platform that we are, this should be a theater of, by, and for the community. And that means everybody. gets to share their stories, gets to have their voices be heard. So that's how I keep coming back to, I'm here to work as an ally. I'm here to work with, not to save.
Awesome. Thank you. I love that phrasing, with, not at. I'm going to use that in my own life if you don't. So I just want to acknowledge also, we're coming up in the last minutes of this panel. This is an important question. I do want to hear from everybody, but I also want to respect everybody's time at home. So we'll finish this loop and then we'll wrap it up. So let's hear from Leslie.
Yeah, the allyship. I've done a number of things out in the community, and I won't be listing them and naming them and being an ally. But what I will say is that when I do those things, and why I'm not listing them is because I don't feel like I would be a good ally by profiting here off of being able to advertise them, right? And so I try to do things that I am not going to profit off of. I'm not going to gain any status off of. I'm not going to, have any social credit from. So I want what I am able to do for others or with others, for them to really have the benefit of my time, my energy, my friendship, my listening ear, whatever it may be, and just to have like a real relationship in that. So so that, I guess that would be my short answer, is is really trying to be there for other people in a way that is on their terms, and not turn it into something that is for me.
Right on. All right, Serene, how do you seek healthy allyship?
I get the opportunities to really work on this every day at work and in our community. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of fine folks like CAP and other community nonprofit members that are doing amazing work. And what I know as a white woman in that space is that I don't take up the space. I don't need to speak. I sit back and listen and learn to all the amazing work that's being done. And so it's an amazing opportunity. The other opportunity I'm afforded is I work for an organization that serves youth and families who are the most vulnerable. So we're not there to save anybody. We don't, that's not how we believe. That's not how I believe. We're there for folks that need support, and they tell us what they need. We meet them where they're at. They know what's needed. And all we're doing is helping support and navigate systems that maybe they haven't had success in. And so I have the opportunity to practice every day. It's the best part of my job.
Right on. And thank you for that work in the community. All right, Jamie, tell us about your journey on allyship.
So I really think allyship means people coming together to work towards a common cause for no personal gain, right? You're working together with people from all backgrounds, all races, all creeds, all colors, all kinds. And then you have to recognize your white privilege in that, right? And then start to have more uncomfortable conversations, because that kind of eliminates that and starts to take that uncomfortableness away. And then I think that we also need to be like, what I can do actively is checking in with my friends or family that are people of color and saying, look, I acknowledge that you're going through a really tough time right now. What is it you specifically need so that I can support you? I don't want to lead the situation. I want to be a support to help you propel forward. And I think it can be challenging to speak up sometimes and kind of do that, but we need to look for more ways to do that, because by being silent, that's like the worst thing we can do. We're just propelling that kind of those actions forward, and that's what we need to stop doing.
Well worded. And for our finale tonight, I'm going to take that theme of how we be an ally by not being silent. I would like to hear from each of you some final thoughts, 1 or 2 sentences max, on how you plan to go out and fight the racist status quo after this conversation. And let's start with Leslie.
Yeah, definitely just continue to work on flexing that muscle of anti-racism. And I do want to speak up more. And thank you, Johnny, for saying that, you don't have to be eloquent to speak out against racism. And I think that that's a really important point, because we can hear others speaking, and it sounds like it is just so on target, and then you get those emotions, and that can be that fragility coming up and kind of catching you in your throat. So I definitely speaking up more.
Well, I wholeheartedly empower you to just bumble your way through addressing those topics.
Thank you.
Still effective. All right. Last thoughts from you, Serene.
I mean, honestly, it's really about me doing the work, right? It's about me deepening my education, holding myself accountable until anti-racism is really integrated into my actions and becomes my comfort zone. Because that's what I need to feel comfortable. So I need to push through it and really working on not avoiding what it means to be accountable. That's where I'm at.
Awesome. Thank you. What about you, Jamie?
So my personal goals are to stand with all people of color. I want to accept their feedback, any feedback actually. And when I'm wrong, I want to be told I'm wrong. And then I want advice, because that's how I learn, so that I can correct all my wrongly learned behaviors. I want to continue conversations like these, because I think they're super important. And then creating awareness about this, I think, is the other thing that I can do personally. And through action, change can occur. And that's kind of my own mission.
Awesome. And last but not least, Stephen.
Yeah, I will freely steal from things that everybody has said this evening, and that's been really for an hour. I think I got a lot out of it from all of you. And again, I always go back to, I tend to see big picture and sometimes get overwhelmed by dismantling systemic racism. But for me, it's like an everyday reminder to myself to take the little steps to make sure that every day is filled with a vigilant fight against racism, from the smallest moments, and I owe it to everybody to stand up and speak out when small things happen, when big things happen. But again, I want to make sure that I am true to that and responding in the moment and doing it every single day, tirelessly, for the rest of my life, and instilling that in my friends and my family.
Awesome. Thank you. Some great last thoughts. We got speak out, take accountability, action brings change, and keep vigilance. I really want to thank all of you for coming on this panel. I know that this is a scary topic. I know that everyone here was really nervous to be put on the stage like this, but you guys did awesome. We're lucky to have you. I want to thank Community Action Partnership of Sonoma County for hosting these. I'm blessed to be able to participate in this wonderful agency, and I think these weekly conversations have been super beneficial to me and to many people I know in the community. So thanks again for Katie for her work putting these on, and thanks for all the staff at and I want to thank our audience for attending tonight. I hope that we gave you some insights, and we look forward to your feedback and insights as well. And with that, everybody, let's go have dinner. Thanks. Good night, everybody.